just introduce myself. My name is Sherry Mizumori. I'm professor and chair of the Department of Psychology here at the University of Washington. And I want to thank you for attending this Roger Laux lecture in one of our special public lectures that we offer from our department. Now, before I introduce Dr. Suzuki, I just want to say a couple of words about the lectureship. Roger Laux was a former professor in our department who played a very important role in trying to understand the physiology of learning and memory. And so when he passed away, his family established this endowment to sponsor world-renowned speakers, such as the one we have tonight, to come and tell us about the latest research on the physiology and the neurophysiology of learning and memory. Now, Dr. Suzuki received her undergraduate degree from UC Berkeley in 1987, where she worked with Dr. Marion Diamond, who's a world-renowned neuroscientist interested in brain plasticity. She then went on to do her PhD in neuroscience from UC San Diego. She then completed a postdoc fellowship at the National Institutes of Health before starting her first faculty position, and I think their only faculty position, she's been there the whole career, at the Center for Neuroscience at New York University in 1998. And again, as she's been there her whole career and has rose up through the ranks of the different professor levels. She has had continuous funding for her really pioneering work in the neurophysiology, neurobiology of learning and memory, and in particular, trying to understand how new long-term memories are formed. She's had also support of numerous foundations, such as the James McDonald Foundation. She's also had a number of honors bestowed upon her to recognize her work, such as she's been the McDonald-Pew Scholar. She's also a McKnight Foundation Scholar. And again, she's received many, many awards. And you probably have seen her in the media recently. Apparently last week, she was on, is it the CBS Morning Show with Charlie Rose. And so, you know, if you haven't, you might go and look on that, where she's talking about the topic that she's talking about tonight. Now, her second area of interest is to understand whether exercise can actually make you smarter. And so with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to her because I want to find out the answer. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much, Sherry, both for the introduction and for the invitation. So it's such a pleasure to be here. I have never been to Seattle before, and you guys have a beautiful, beautiful city. And it's been a treat to see it go from rainy to absolutely spectacular this afternoon. So this talk, I think, may be a little bit different from the talks the science talks that you've seen, that you've heard, because it really is a talk where I'm going to be telling you about how I used neuroscience to actually change and improve my life. And on the other hand, how my life ended up changing and improving the neuroscience that I do. And that really, so there's going to be more personal stories perhaps in this talk than you're used to hearing. And the first personal story starts with the day I realized I wanted to be a neuroscientist. And I have a very specific memory. It was the very first day of my freshman class at UC Berkeley. And I was taking a freshman seminar class called The Brain and Its Potential with Marion Diamond, a world-renowned neuroscientist. And I'll never forget that day because, first of all, there was what Marion looked like. So she kind of looked like a science rock star, or whatever however I would imagine as a freshman, a science rock star would look like. She's very tall, very beautiful, with a blonde bouffant hairdo. She was wearing a beautiful skirt and blouse with a crisp white lab coat over it. But more strikingly, on the table in front of her was a flowered hat box. It's like, what is in that hat box? And she starts telling us about the brain, and as she does that, she lifts open the lid of that hat box, and with her gloved hands, she slowly and very lovingly pulls out a real preserved human brain. I'd never seen one before, and I thought that was the most cool thing that I'd ever seen. But what was even cooler was when she started telling us about what she studied about the brain. So it turns out in the late 1950s, early 1960s, she and her colleagues were the first to ask, well, might the brain be able to change in response to the environment? We call that brain plasticity. And You have to understand, at that time, nobody thought the brain could change in response. Once you got to adulthood, that was it. No changes, can't find it, too difficult, it's not there. But she and her colleagues decided to try an experiment. Here's a picture of her at that time. Can you tell which one she is? I think so, yeah. Okay, just check. So she and her colleagues asked what would happen if you raise rats in the kind of Disney World of environments. That is, a big enclosure with lots of toys and lots of other rats to play with. And here's a picture of one of those enriched environments. Lots of toys, lots of rats, and you compare the brains of these rats with rats that were raised in what they called impoverished environments, with no toys, small space, and just maybe one or two other rats in there. And what she found was really revolutionary for the time, because she found clear structural changes in the brain. Here is a view of a very thin section through a rat brain. And what they found after that manipulation is those enriched environment rats, those Disney World rats. The outer cortex, here is the outer covering of the rat brain, which is called the cortex. That thickness of that cortex was bigger. The cortex was bigger in the rats that were raised in Disney World. The neurotransmitter levels changed, especially acetylcholine, a key neurotransmitter for memory. There were more synapses. Synapses are the connections between nerve cells, and there were more of them in the rats that were raised in Disney World. More angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is the birth of new blood vessels in the brain. And because the brain is the #1 consumer of oxygen in the whole body, you want as many of those blood vessels to be there so you can nourish your brain cells with that good oxygenated blood. More growth factors were in the Disney World rats, and what they found later was that raising rats in enriched environments caused what we call the birth of new neurons in a key structure in the brain important for memory, and that structure is called the hippocampus. So the birth of new structures in this hippocampus is called hippocampal neurogenesis. And in this picture, you can see an outline of the hippocampus. Here you have one on one side and a mirror one on the other side. That means that raising rats in enriched environments actually gives you more shiny new hippocampal cells in your hippocampus, a structure critical for memory. So I got all this on day 1 of the class, and so that really blew my mind. I thought brain plasticity and understanding brain plasticity was the most interesting thing I'd ever heard of before, and that's the day I decided I want to become a neuroscientist. So I went on to graduate school and postdoc, and I decided to study my own version of neuroplasticity, a form of neuroplasticity that happens every single day, and that is the formation of new memories. How many of you formed a new memory today? Yes, okay. So that means your brain changed just a little bit. And I wanted to understand how that happened. Now, I just told you that the hippocampus is critical for long-term memory, and I just want to spend a little bit of time because we're going to come back to this. Here is the location of the hippocampus deep in the temporal lobe here of the brain. So this part of the temporal lobe has been cut away so you can see the location of the hippocampus. The word hippocampus means seahorse, and you can't tell here, but you can tell from this dissected human hippocampus next to this real seahorse why early anatomists named it the hippocampus. We know the most, probably the single most information we've ever gotten about the hippocampus came from a very famous amnesic patient that was studied starting in the 1950s. He was known for many years by the initials HM. We know now that his name was Henry Mollison, and this is a picture of Henry. And Henry suffered from very, very severe epilepsy. His epilepsy was so severe that medications didn't do a thing to it. And at that time, in the 1950s, the way to treat epilepsy, if it was very, very severe, was to go in and remove one of the hippocampi. They were trying to guess which hippocampi was the genesis of the epileptic seizures. But Henry's epilepsy was so severe that they decided to remove both hippocampi. And on one hand, the operation was a success because seizures went significantly down. But on the other hand, it was a terrible tragedy because when he woke up from this surgery, they became immediately aware of the fact that Henry no longer could form any new long-term memories. He could have a conversation, he could appreciate you, but once somebody would come into the room and introduce themselves, literally a minute later, he would have no memory of that interaction, telling us for the first time that the hippocampus, here's a view of the hippocampal removal that they thought they did in HM compared to a normal brain, and here's a cross-section where the hippocampus is removed, telling us that the hippocampus was critical for long-term memory. Now, I'm not going to be able to talk too much more about HM, but I'll just tell you, for those interested, his is a fascinating science and real-life story. And I had the privilege of interviewing Brenda Milner, who is now in her 90s, but can recall her graduation from Cambridge with a math degree in the 1930s like it was yesterday. So I got to interview her on a series of podcasts that I created for PRX. My podcast is called Totally Cerebral, and you can listen to this interview that I got to do with Brenda Milner, who first identified HM and Henry, and also a second podcast that I did with one of her students, Sue Corkin, who wrote a beautiful book called a beautiful book about the life of patient HM, and she describes her 47-year study of his life and his memory. And so they're really things that I'm very proud of, and so if you're interested in that, please take a look. But I went on to study a different question in memory. So this major discovery happened in 1957. When I started my lab in 1998, I wanted to ask, can I visualize, can I see the electrophysiological signature of a new memory being born? And so what I did is I recorded the activity of individual cells in that hippocampus, that structure that HM told us was so important for memory, as animals were forming new memories. And I'm only going to talk very briefly about this, but what I was able to do is, as a recording from individual cells, you can hear their electrical activities. Cells, brain cells, communicate by brief bursts of electrical activity called action potentials. And on an audio monitor, they sound like little pops. Every time a neuron fires, it sounds like a little pop. And so you can monitor the activity of a single cell, and that's what I was doing. It says one day I was recording in the hippocampus as an animal was trying to learn an association between a picture and a particular rewarded target. And what I found was this cell wasn't doing very much, but the animal hadn't learned the association. But I noticed that just as the animal started to make the right response, he showed that he went from not learning to learning. I noticed a big change in the firing rate of the cell. At first, the cell went pop, 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 but later, once the animal learned, and just as he was kind of learning that association, the firing rate went way up. Only later did I realize that I was listening to what really can be thought of as the birth of a new memory. These cells we found in the hippocampus don't care about these things that they don't understand, but once a new association is found, a subset of them start firing very specifically to that new association. Well, that finding, physiology in the hippocampus, got me tenure. And so now we're jumping to 2004, so yay, that was great. And I have to say, I'm just going to give you a little insight into the lab. So life in the lab at that point looked like this. Like a dinner party you never wanted to leave, because there was always somebody interesting to talk to and always something interesting to talk about. That was my life in the lab, and that's because I spent all of my time in the lab. By contrast, my social life looked something like this. You know those Clint Eastwood westerns where there's this, deserted coast town and the tumbleweed rolling around in the dirt street? That was much more representative of my social life. Not only that, I ate takeout so much that I gained 25 pounds. And so I had a great lab life, I had tenure, had no social life, 25 pounds. What am I going to do? I decided that I didn't know how to tackle the social life, but I did know how to lose weight. So I went and joined the gym. And I exercised. And it wasn't overnight, But after a year and a half, I really got up to a much higher level. I was a regular gym goer. And the first thing I noticed is that my mood was really good. Anybody have the experience that their mood goes up when they exercise? Does anybody experience that? Okay, almost everybody. Many people raise their hands. I noticed that first. But then what I noticed is, this was once I got to a pretty high level. Oh, and then I have to tell you that there was one particular thing that got me to that high level. Everybody needs to find that thing that really keeps them coming back to the gym. And the class that I found was a class in my New York City gym called Intensati. Now, it was developed by a fitness instructor in New York City. You may not have heard of it, but it is so addictive. This takes physical movements from kickboxing and dance and yoga and martial arts. So it just sounds like an aerobics class. But it pairs each physical movement with a positive spoken affirmation. So instead of just punching back and forth like you would do in a kickboxing class, you would say, I am strong now. And each move is associated with a different affirmation. So what does that do? It makes you feel a little bit silly doing it, unless everybody's doing it together, which they're doing. But on a physical level, it actually increases the cardio output, because everybody knows that it's harder to talk and jog than it is to just jog alone. And so it was increasing the cardio output. The positive affirmations were kind of replacing those negative thoughts that we might have every once in a while during the day with, for a whole hour, positive thoughts. And I loved this workout. And when I really got regular because of this workout, I noticed I was writing grants. We, as psychology special guest area, all know about writing grants. And I noticed that when I was exercising regularly, that my attention span was longer, and my long-term memory, this is something that I had been studying for 15 years, was better. I was able to make associations between different things much better. And I thought, well, what's going on? Am I just on a roll? Am I having a good day? But no, it seemed to be correlated with exercise. The weeks that I was really regular, my writing was really good. And the weeks that I sloughed off and I only went once or twice, the writing didn't go as well. Now, I'm just an N of 1. That's just a personal observation. That is not an experiment. But what I could do is go back to the literature and look at the findings about what we know about what exercise is doing to the brain. And I went back to find this very exciting, growing literature about all the anatomical, physiological, and functional changes that exercise were making to the brain. And then I went back a little bit farther to ask, well, where did all this information start with? And I found a name that was very familiar. And that name, so my mood improved, memory and attention improved. Sorry, I forgot that. I found a name that was very familiar, and that name was Marion Diamond. This is Marion as she looked when I was taking classes with her in the 1980s. Because it turns out that all of those early studies on the effects of enriched environments, here's a schematic of a rat-enriched environment, and the next question was, well, what was it about this complex environment? What was it about Disneyland that was making all these brain changes? And people, these were not studies that Marion did, but others that followed in her footsteps systematically looked at everything, and what they found was all you had to give the rat was a running wheel. And all of those changes that came from environmental enrichment, we can say that they all come from exercise as well. So exercise is making the cortex thicker, certain parts of the cortex, in changing neurotransmitter levels, giving more synapses, more angiogenesis, more growth factors, and exercise enhances the birth of new neurons in the hippocampus, hippocampal neurogenesis. And so when I realized that, I thought, okay, this is something I could dig my teeth into. I know the environmental literature, environmental enrichment literature, and this is a fascinating thing. I want to study this more. So not only does exercise, and now I want to bring in some more recent findings, exercise in rodents is doing all these different things. And let's stop for a minute and think about the effect of exercise enhancing hippocampal neurogenesis. I have to tell you that without exercising at all of us, all of our adults in the room have hippocampal neurogenesis happening. It happens all the time. What exercise does is it beefs up that process so you get more hippocampal neurons born and more of them survive with exercise. Now, is that good or is that bad? You might think, well, what if you have new cells and they mess up the memories that are in there, maybe it could be bad. But they've also shown that exercise, at the same time as it's increasing hippocampal neurogenesis, it's actually improving a number of different long-term memory functions in the rodents. All these different kinds of tasks, all these different studies are showing significant positive improvements in rats that simply got exposed to a running wheel. And I thought, that's what's happening in my brain. I'm like a little rat on a running wheel, and my hippocampal neurogenesis is going up. And so, but I wanted to explore this area of research more. I was fascinated with it, and I thought the best way to do that was to actually teach a new undergraduate class on this topic, to make me learn the topic more. And so I decided to develop a class called Can Exercise Change Your Brain? And I was going to go over all the literature, starting with Marion Diamond's environmental enrichment, going all the way through the rodent studies that I've just briefly summarized, and going all the way to the human clinical studies. But I thought, this class was inspired by me going to the gym and exercising and feeling that high from exercise. And I thought, well, why don't I just bring exercise into the classroom so that students can actually appreciate that as well? Well, I learned that NYU was not so keen on paying an exercise instructor to help teach my class, because I was supposed to teach my class. So I thought, okay, so I'll go to the gym and I'll get certified as a fitness instructor, and I'll teach the exercise. And I'm going to have NYU pay for it because I'm doing it for the students. And so that's what I did. They paid for my exercise. I did a one-week teacher training. I got certified to teach this same class in Tensati, and then comes the very first day of class. So I walk into my regular classroom clad in my best Lululemon, head to toe, spandex. And I found myself in front of a very scared-looking group of undergraduates. They did not know what was happening. They knew they had to come in workout clothes. They knew some sort of exercise was going to happen, but they were very scared. And to tell you the truth, I was a little bit scared too, because I'd never actually done it in that classroom where I'd lectured so much. But once I got going, it was great, and it really changed the dynamic of the whole classroom. I don't know if any of you have ever sweated with your professors, but when you do that, it actually changes the whole feeling of the classroom. That was the most interactive, the most back and forth kind of class, the most vocal class that I've ever taught. And that has really stuck to me, and trying to develop classes like that. But more importantly, I realized that I was going to teach these students exercise once a week for the rest of the semester, and that they could actually be my very first experimental subjects. So I tested them cognitively at the beginning and at the end of the semester, and I tested them on a test that was supposed to be dependent on the one particular subregion in the hippocampus where all those new neurons are born. It turns out that they're not born all over the hippocampus, only in this one subregion called the dentate gyrus, doesn't matter what it's called. And this structure is supposed to be important for memory encoding. So I tested them on the test. Here's me leading my first study with a whole bunch of NYU students. And so I asked, could just one time a week of increased exercise, could it affect performance on this task? And I wasn't expecting very much. I really thought that, first of all, these were high-functioning, very smart NYU undergraduates. They're at the height of their cognitive power. Could one time exercise a week change anything? And what we found was, yes, it did. And what it changed was response time, reaction time. Let me tell you the experimental design. I tested them cognitively. We had 16 weeks of me teaching an hour of aerobic exercise followed by an hour-and-a-half lecture discussion. I tested them cognitively again, and then they got to write final papers, and they got to actually analyze their data together with a control class that I tested. It wasn't so difficult to find an elective course where they weren't teaching exercise in the classroom. And so I did that, and I tested them at the beginning and the end, and I compared the results. And what did we find? We found significant improvements in reaction times. The exercise group going down, getting lower reaction times is better, got significantly better relative to the control group. We also had an interesting observation, and that was just, if you look at the overall performance. How well did they do the memory encoding task? The most striking thing was my control class, that at the beginning of the semester was doing well, and that control class got significantly worse at the end of the semester. That was the moment I realized that I was doing a stress experiment in addition to my exercise experiment, because all of you know stress levels go through the roof at the end of a semester, and I couldn't help it. I hadn't thought it through, but that was happening at the same time. But the bottom line was this very significant but relatively subtle finding really got the fire burning under me to really try and understand, if I could see this with just 1 time a week exercise, what would happen if I really got students going on the task more, 3 times a week, more regular, so we can actually see change in cardiorespiratory function. And so this led me to ask what else is known about the effects of exercise on memory in humans. And it turns out that there are beautiful studies, again, starting in humans, that parallel those findings in rodents. For example, this study showed that 1 year of increased aerobic exercise in elderly people increased the size of the hippocampus significantly, and not other kind of control structures. That's exactly what you would expect in a manipulation that's supposed to be increasing hippocampal neurogenesis. Another study showed that this was more a correlational study, that level of aerobic fitness is associated with better memory performance, called relational memory, thought to be dependent on the hippocampus and that dentate gyrus, in pre-adolescent children. So in the relational encoding class task, if you were high fit, you did significantly better on this task than if you were a low fit student. And on a control task, there was no difference. So there is a mounting evidence, but the problem still is that it's hard to get people to commit and stick to a long exercise program. I had my students, trapped in the classroom. If I said they have to exercise, they have to exercise, but you don't have that experience. And so we moved on to my dream experiment, which was a randomized control study of the long-term effects of aerobic exercise that really improve your cardiorespiratory function on a wide battery of cognitive tasks. So I wanted a randomized control study. I wanted to look at a really high level of exercise and take low-fit people from not fit to fit. And I collaborate with a great spinning company in New York called Swerve that donated all the classes. They're an amazing new session, and we're in the middle of this study where we're looking at the effects of 3 months of increased spin. So you have to appreciate that these classes in New York, they cost $30 a pop. And people in this study are getting 3 classes a week free. And we hope to really see differences. That is the ongoing goal right now. And so that's the experimental design. Oh, I'll just mention, what is our control group? So we wanted a group fitness kind of thing that didn't have aerobic activity. So we're doing group video game playing, which we know changes the brain as well, but we're betting that it's changing the brain in a very different way than high-level cardio in terms of spin. But what do we really need? We need a way to test lots and lots of subjects. And it turns out I have lots and lots of subjects. This is Yankee Stadium NYU graduation 2015. And so the idea is we are collaborating with the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences to try and develop a more widespread exercise program for freshmen coming in. Some of them will drop out, that's okay, but have a much larger population to start to ask these same questions and really get to the prescription of how much exercise, what kind of exercise, how long of exercise do you need to change these functions. So I focused on memory first, which I noticed that was changing. Let me move to attention. So I also noticed that my attention was changing. And in fact, it turns out that the biggest effect that you see in humans with exercise from randomized control studies is on attention. And here's a review of study. It's a relatively old study, but this is a wonderful illustration. This is a meta-analysis of 18 studies done in elderly, published between 1996 and 2001, showing the strongest improvement after exercise comes with what they call executive function. That includes attention. And so the biggest effect people have found with increased aerobic exercise, particularly in the elderly, is on your attention. Now, I quickly want to go and tell you how we studied attention. We knew this was a very sensitive measure in humans, and we wanted to ask not only what long-term increases in exercise would do to your attention function, but what if you just go to the gym for an hour? Everybody can more easily go to the gym just once for an hour than they can commit to a 3-month exercise program. So what if we just have test the subjects cognitively, have them ride on an exercise bike for 60 minutes, and then after particular days, delays, we're going to test them again. And our control for the exercise study is instead of doing lots of aerobic exercise, you're going to watch Jack Bauer jump around in 24. So you're just going to watch a video for 60 minutes. And we're going to focus on attention, tests of attention and memory. And so let me just jump to the results. The results, I'm just going to show you all the delay intervals combined. And what we found is 2 tasks, actually 3 tasks, showed significant improvements. Let me start with the tasks, these 2 tasks below. These are classic tests of shifting your attention. The Stroop color word task is a very difficult task where you are asked to read first a list of words that are all names of colors, red, blue, green, and they're printed in black. So very easy, very fast to read that. And then you're asked to read the same list of words where the word is printed in a different color. Sometimes the color that it's printed in is the same color as the word, sometimes it's different. And sometimes I ask you to tell me to read the word, and sometimes I ask you to tell me the color. And it slows people down a lot. And so it turns out that just 1 hour of increased aerobic exercise, cycling, increases performance on the Stroop task compared to that video watching task. And also, this is another task that requires attention and shifting attention and used widely. It also significantly improves. This is averaged over 30 minutes to 2 hours, and so we get significant effects there. Let's look up here for a second. This is the Hopkins verbal learning test, and basically we give you a list of 13 words. We ask you to recall it, either immediately after we give you the words or in a delayed fashion. And these are significant differences too. And at first we said, all right, exercise is improving this kind of long-term memory function. Until we looked at the data. Look at the control group. They are actually getting worse, significantly worse, after their video viewing than before, both on the immediate and the delayed. And so for this, our interpretation is, watching Jack Bauer is very bad for your memory. And, but more generally, I think video watching is actually interfering with long-term memory. And we did not know this before. It turns out that's probably not the best control. It worked here, it didn't affect here. But it's hard to say what this effect is. We're going to have to redo this study. This part of the study with a different control task, but we think that this is very valid, and because others have shown in a wide range of situations that attention is improved with exercise, this suggests that just 1 hour of aerobic exercise can rev up your attentional capacity. Okay. I also noticed, and I mentioned first, that mood was improved with my exercise workout, and we know from a wide range of studies, both in animals and humans, that that is because there are increases in various levels of neurotransmitters and neurohormones, serotonin, noradrenaline, dopamine, which is not so much mood as much as reward, are all increasing with exercise, and endorphins, the brain's natural version of morphine, is also increasing with aerobic exercise. So you're getting kind of a boost of all of these good, feel-good brain chemicals with exercise. And we wanted to test that in a different situation. We wanted to look at the effects of exercise in traumatic brain injury, where depression is a very common side effect. And so these studies were done in collaboration with Dr. Teresa Ashman and her graduate student Christine Lee. And so what we did is, it was a relatively small number of subjects in this study. We tested them cognitively. They did 1 hour of, we're going back to this workout intensati, twice a week for 8 weeks. I didn't teach this class. And then we tested them cognitively at the end. And the control group was simply not exercising. We didn't have them do anything else. And even though it was a small number of subjects, what we found was quite striking improvements in a wide range of quality of life measures. So intensati improves mood and quality of life in patients with traumatic brain injury. Their depression scores went significantly down with exercise. Their positive affect scores on these worksheets that they do went up significantly. Their fatigue scores went down in the exercise group, and their quality of life scores went up. Now, I have to say that this was not the highest level of exercise, because many of our subjects had hemiparalysis because of their traumatic brain injury. But I have to say that I watched them the very first day. I came to introduce the study. We did a 3-minute little demo, and it was a little bit weird to do the affirmations when they've never done it before. There was also a little bit of difficulty with coordination. But I also came the very last day, and I can tell you that they were doing the workout at the level of the best New York City fitness group. Their level had gone up. They had improved so much. It took them a while to get there, but they were doing so well. And I can't wait to, one of the big questions people ask is, well, Wendy, is that the exercise or is that the positive affirmations that they do in intensati? And of course, that could be a big factor in these quality of life scores. But we're starting here, and certainly I'll take these significant effects, and we're going to go on to ask, can we separate out the effects of exercise and affirmations and ask whether there is a super additive effect when you put them together in a workout like intensati. Now, please don't get the message that I'm telling everybody to go out and do this particular form of workout. As I talk about in the book, I think this suggests that the idea of intentional exercise is very powerful. And you could add a positive affirmation or a positive thought to any form of workout that you do. If you like to walk in beautiful outdoors around a lake in Seattle, add an affirmation to your walk, to your hike, to your kickboxing, to your cycling, whatever you like to do. And we don't know the answer to what it's doing, but test it out and see whether it's helping you either in your mood or how you're feeling after the exercise. So the title of this talk is The Astonishing Truth About Exercise. And this next improvement or change, I didn't realize what was happening for a while. But the other thing that happened when I went to the gym and I got much more regular, I increased my mood, my memory, my attention, but I seemed to get more creative, more imaginative, think outside the box. I mean, it was during this time that I created the Can Exercise Change the Brain class and decided to bring exercise into the classroom. And that's changed my teaching from now until the end of time. I also created other classes, like a class that I was mentioning at the reception earlier called Art Meets Brain, where I bring in different artists from New York City. And we talk about the neurobiology of acting, what's happening, the neurobiology of emotion, and how you understand acting through understanding the neurobiology of emotion. The neurobiology of improvisation. So I have a rap performer come in and teach the students how to rap and have them make their own raps, and then talk about the neurobiology of rap. People have studied jazz improv and what's happening in your brain, as well as rap. And so I really feel like this all started as I got more regular with the gym. And is there any evidence at all that exercise can have an effect on imagination or creativity? And it turns out the answer is yes. So this whole field is very, very new, and it has to do with our old friend, the hippocampus. I told you that the major function of the hippocampus for the last 50 years has been thought to be long-term memory. That's a big, important function, so, and many of us in the neuroscientists in the audience have devoted our lives to understanding the memory functions of the hippocampus. But my colleague Eleanor Maguire at University College London tested tested patients with hippocampal damage, and of course they had a memory impairment. That was not so surprising. But what she asked was not about their memory. She asked them simply to imagine a situation that they had never experienced before. In this case, she asked them to imagine what it would be like to be sitting on a tropical beach. And both the patients with hippocampal lesions and the controls had never been on a tropical beach before. And what she found is the patients with hippocampal damage had a significantly difficult time in coming up with strong images of this imagination. So let me just read part of what one of the subjects said. So asked, imagine a tropical beach and tell me about it. They said, as for seeing, I can't really, apart from just sky. I can hear the sound of seagulls and the sea. I can feel the grains of sand between my fingers. I can hear one of those ship's hooters. That's about it. And then they were asked, are you actually seeing this in your mind's eye? And the answer was no. The only thing I can see is blue. And this contrasts with what you might imagine a control subject might be able to say, and they described the sand and the different buildings on the beach and the fruity drink with a little umbrella in it, and very, very elaborate. And so they could quantify these verbal descriptions, and it was clear that the patients with hippocampal lesions could not imagine very well. And again, this was not a language deficit. They were normal on all tests of language. So this was almost as revelatory as HM, that the hippocampus is important for memory, and all of us are studying memory, and suddenly they say, oh my God, the hippocampus is important for imagination as well. Well, you can study this by looking at amnesic patients, but you could also ask what kinds of activations do you get when you put people in a magnetic scanner and look at brain activations as you're asking them to remember something. And it turns out that there is a network of widespread brain areas that get activated when you're remembering things from memory, and the hippocampus here is part of that network. But the same network of brain areas also get activated when we're asked to imagine something that you have not experienced before. And neuroscientists have started to think about this in terms of past thinking, thinking about the past, that is memory, as well as future thinking, thinking about the future. And when you think about it that way, it's not so unusual, or it's not so odd to think that maybe the same brain mechanisms that are allowing you to put together and remember things in the past also maybe put things together in a new way in the future that could be the basis of imagination. So the hypothesis that I gained from this, that is one of the hypotheses that I'm interested in testing, is that exercise, just in the same way that it might enhance memory function through hippocampal neurogenesis, exercise may enhance imagination through hippocampal neurogenesis, because all those new cells may be, at the same time that they're helping memory, past thinking, also help imagination or future thinking. But the implication is that gym going is not only helping all these things we've talked about, mood and attention and memory, but it may help imagination, a core function of creativity. So there are such exciting things to look at, and what I love about this area of study is that there's so much low-lying fruit because of the beautiful work that has been done in animal studies to look at the effects of wheel running on all these different brain areas. They've focused on the hippocampus. There's some indication that these same functions are happening in the humans, but then what everybody asks me is, well, Wendy, how much exercise do I need? Just tell me how much I have to go to the gym to get my memory better. And I have to sheepishly say, we don't know. We don't know that prescription. And that is a core question that I want to try and answer. We know it's there. We know what the mechanisms probably are. We just don't know how it works in terms of practical, how many times, how high does your heart rate have to get to be able to do the minimum. Everybody wants to know the minimum amount of exercise they have to do to get these brain improvements. And that is what is really exciting and driving me in the work that I'm doing in my lab right now. So what is the astonishing truth about exercise? The astonishing truth about exercise is that it has so many more benefits that most people are not aware of. Everybody knows that it's good for your body, it's good for getting ready for summer and outdoors, but it's actually doing profound things to the anatomy, to the physiology and the function of the brain in areas important for attention, for memory, for mood, and possibly for creativity as well. And I find that astonishing. And so it's the next step. All we have to do is get those thousands of NYU students to go into the program and find out what the answer is. And the other exciting thing is it has so many implications for everything from PE in schools. Why aren't we giving our children more exercise? Look what it's doing to their brain. To recommendations to help not cure, but stave off dementia and Alzheimer's disease for a longer time, because your brain is literally healthier. It has more blood vessels. It has more hippocampal strength. The hippocampus is one of the first areas that's attacked in Alzheimer's disease. So you're not going to cure it with exercise, but you're going to strengthen your hippocampus. And you want to go in to old age with as strong of a hippocampus as you can. So that's the astonishing truth about exercise, and that's why I'm switching fields from memory to exercise to try and answer these questions. And I will end just by acknowledging the really, really talented people in my lab, all the undergraduates, postdocs, graduate students that have helped get this new research area off the ground and also helped with all the memory work that I've done. And I thank you for your attention.